President Thomas Jefferson to Benjamin Rush, February 28, 1803.
Dear Sir, I wish to mention to you in confidence that I have obtained authority from Congress to undertake the long-desired objective of exploring the Missouri River and whatever river heading with that leads into the Western Ocean. About 10 chosen woodsmen, headed by Captain Lewis, my secretary, will set out on it immediately and probably accomplish it in 2 seasons. Captain Lewis is brave, prudent, habituated to the woods, and familiar with Indian manners and character. He is not regularly educated, but he possesses a great mass of acute observation on all the subjects of nature which present themselves.
When President Thomas Jefferson wrote this letter to a prominent Philadelphia physician, he was in the midst of the greatest land deal in history, the Louisiana Purchase. For $15 million, Jefferson had doubled the size of the United States. His vision for an empire of democracy extending across a continent was becoming a reality. But the lands to the west were shrouded in mystery. Jefferson needed information, not only to satisfy his curiosity, but to fulfill the destiny of his nation. And his instruments of discovery were 2 exceptional men, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark.
The journals of Lewis and Clark are our national poem. It's an epic. It's our Iliad and our Odyssey. You can open those journals anywhere, and you start reading those things aloud, and it's just magic.
And these 2 explorers were given the mission to take a small band of people into a totally unknown place and travel 8,000 miles to explore this country. And they did a magnificent job. No one could have done better. If this is not a great story, then we don't have any great stories.
Every American owns a bit of the Lewis and Clark story, but in Missouri we hold it just a bit tighter. Most of all, this is the story of our river, the Missouri, and what this country was like before the heavy hand of settlement. This is the story of Lewis and Clark in Missouri.
April 8th, 1804. Honored parents, I now embrace this opportunity of writing to you once more to let you know where I am and where I'm going. I am well, thank God, and in high spirits. I am now on an expedition to the westward with Captain Lewis and Captain Clark, who are appointed by the President of the United States to go on an expedition through the interior parts of North America. We are to ascend the Missouri River with a boat as far as navigable, and then go by land to the Western Ocean.
John Ordway wrote these words on the east bank of the Mississippi, looking up into the mouth of the Missouri River and into the unknown. Jefferson's 10 chosen woodsmen had swelled to over 40. They called themselves the Corps of Discovery. As Ordway and the other men prepared for their journey, they must have reflected on the leaders they were trusting with their lives, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. 2 men whose bond of friendship created one of our country's greatest adventures. Meriwether Lewis was 29 years old. Clark was 4 years older. Young men, but experienced. Both had served as commissioned officers in the United States Army. Lewis had served under Clark on the Indiana frontier. Now their roles were reversed. Jefferson had selected Lewis as his personal secretary, groomed him, prepared him for this epic journey. With the mantle of leadership, Lewis turned to a friend, William Clark.
June 19th, 1803. Dear Clark, if there is anything in this enterprise which would induce you to participate with me in its fatigues, its dangers, its honors, believe me, there is no man on earth with whom I should feel equal pleasure in sharing them as with yourself. With sincere affection and regard, your humble servant, Meriwether Lewis.
Dear Lewis,
I received by yesterday's mail your letter of the 19th, the contents of which I received with much pleasure. This is an undertaking fraught with many difficulties. But, my friend, I do assure you that no man lives with whom I would prefer to undertake such a trip as yourself. With every sincerity and friendship, your obedient servant, William Clark.
One of the most remarkable things about the Lewis and Clark expedition is the sheer fact of joint command. This is something that's unheard of in military organizations. You don't have joint commands. I think obviously the Secretary of War was extremely skeptical about it because in the end, despite Lewis's insistence, he didn't make Clark a co-captain. He made him a lieutenant. The only people who seem to be absolutely certain that this was the way their organization was going to function were Lewis and Clark themselves. In this instance, it was the most brilliant partnership probably in American history.
Neither Clark nor Lewis made mention of Clark's official subordinate status during the journey. To the men of the crew and to each other, they were full partners, equals, Captains Lewis and Clark. It's immense, it's powerful, and in 1804 it was a formidable challenge. As the members of the expedition looked up into the mouth of the Missouri, they were looking into the unknown. There were more than 40 men in the Corps of Discovery, in 2 large pirogues and a 55-foot keelboat heavily laden with supplies. Not only did they face the enormous challenge of moving this mass of men and material up the river, they were also to record their impressions.
Just reading their journals and the incredible detail of the awesome fish and wildlife resources, the abundance, the diversity of these resources, just astonishing. And I like to think that the river that they encountered was perhaps something akin to the original Garden of Eden.
So it began. The party set out from their winter camp on the Mississippi River and into the history books.
May 14th, 1804. Set out at 4 o'clock and proceeded up the Missouri under sail to the first island in the Missouri and camped. Wind from the northeast. Men are in high spirits.
They lingered a few days in St. Charles. Lewis's description of the first and only European settlement on the Missouri echoes the clash of cultures between the old French and their new American administrators.
May 20th, 1804. The village contains a chapel, 100 dwelling houses, and about 450 inhabitants. Their houses are generally small and but illy constructed. A great majority of the inhabitants are miserably poor, illiterate, and when at home, excessively lazy, though they are polite, hospitable, and by no means deficient in point of natural genius. They live in a perfect state of harmony among each other.
May 21st, 1804. Set out from St. Charles at 3 o'clock after getting every matter arranged. We proceeded on under a gentle breeze.
The most recurrent phrase in all of those journals are 3 simple words. We proceeded on. And I think it was like their way of getting across a broad continent at about 12 miles a day. Each day they woke up, they didn't know what the day would bring them. They didn't know what was around the next bend of the river. They didn't know what was over that next horizon. And they had to struggle every day. We proceeded on.
May 22nd, 1804. We proceeded on past several small farms on the bank and a large creek called Bonhomme. This day we passed several islands and some high lands on the starboard side. Very hard water.
Well, the lower Missouri in the spring of 1804, early summer, was a shakedown cruise. They're learning how to manage that keelboat against the Missouri's incredible current and the sawyers and the snags and overhanging trees and winds that don't come at the right time, and just how do you maneuver against this beast of a river?
May 24th, 1804. Set out very early past a very bad part of the river called the Devil's Race Ground. This is where the current sets against some projecting rocks. The swiftness of the current wheeled the boat, broke our tow rope, and was nearly oversetting the boat. All hands jumped out on the upper side and bore on that side. We camped about a mile above where we were so nearly lost. Hard water. This place the worst I've ever saw. I call it the Retrograde Bend.
After the incident at Retrograde Bend above Tavern Rock, where Captain Clark noted that nothing but, literally a miracle just kept the boat from going down, a similar incident happened just about a couple of weeks later, where the boat got hung up on some sand. It started listing. It looked like it was going to capsize. And Clark says that in an instant, all the men were overboard with a rope, and in another instant, they had that keel boat fixed fast, and they were out of danger just within moments, and everyone knew exactly what to do. Clark at that time said that he would not trade this group of men for any boatmen on the Mississippi.
The previous summer, as Lewis was preparing to leave Washington for his rendezvous with Clark, he wrote about the type of men he was looking for.
When descending the Ohio, it shall be my duty by inquiry to find out and engage some good hunters, stout, healthy, unmarried men, accustomed to the woods and capable of bearing bodily fatigue in a considerable degree.
They were young men, in their 20s mostly, hunters from Kentucky, experts with a long rifle, boatmen from St. Charles, thoroughly experienced, thoroughly French. There was a black man, York, owned by Clark as a slave, but considered one of the crew on the expedition. Later in the journey, they would be accompanied by an Indian woman and her child. In many ways, the core of Discovery reflected the population of the western frontier. Together, they mirrored the energy and determination of their newly formed nation. Now the captains had a crew they could take to the Pacific. And as the Corps of Discovery set up their camp on a sand island opposite the Luther River, near present-day Hermann, Missouri, on May 26, 1804, Lewis wrote his orders of detachment.
May 26, 1804. The commanding officers direct that 3 squads under the commands of Sergeants Floyd, Ordway, and Pryor, heretofore forming 2 messes each, shall, until further orders, constitute 3 messes only, the same being altered and organized as follows. 1. Charles Floyd. 2. Hugh McNeil.
The fact that you always have to keep foremost in your mind is that it was a military expedition. With strict military discipline, and this was not only involved with making camp and setting up guard duty and all those things, but the functions that they did out on the boat. A person was designated to watch for creeks, another person was designated to watch for rafts coming down the river with traders. They had obviously spent a lot of time thinking about the way in which this organization was going to click and the way in which these people were going to work together.
June 1st, 1804. Came to the point of the Osage River on the left side of the Missouri. This Osage River very high. We felled all the trees in the point to make observations. Set up until 12 o'clock taking observations this night.
These were men of the Enlightenment. And science was the primary objective of one major part of the expedition. Now, the biggest objective was to find an all-water route to the Pacific and to explore the Louisiana Territory. And, as important, report. Tell us what's out there. Tell us about the flora and the fauna. Tell us about what's located where. Tell us about the deposits. Tell us about what grows. Tell us about the climate. Tell us about where this lines up in the latitude and the longitude, and so on.
They recorded everything, following Jefferson's instructions to the letter. In particular, Jefferson wanted to know about the people inhabiting the line they are to pursue. They were to endeavor to make themselves acquainted, as far as the diligent pursuit of their journey shall admit, with the names of their nations and their numbers.
June 5th, 1804. Our scout discovered the fresh sign of about 10 Indians. I expect that those Indians are on their way to war against the Osage Nation. Probably they are Sauk. Past a projecting rock called the Manitou. From this devil to the point on the larboard side, north 23 degrees, west 7.5 degrees.
The Manitou Bluffs derive their name from Native American pictographs of these Manitou figures. They're sort of kind of half human, half deer or something, have antlers projecting from them, and they represent the Great Spirit. And so these spectacular bluffs must have held a special place with the Native Americans, because it's about the only place that they saw Native American artwork like this painted along the bluffs. And the neat thing about them today is in so many places the river is in a totally different place than it was back in Lewis and Clark's time. But along the Manitou Bluffs, the river is always run along the base of those bluffs. We see the same view today that Lewis and Clark saw back in 1804.
June 13. Past some charming land. Passing the River Sheraton, a beautiful open prairie comes to the river below its mouth. This is a beautiful place. The prairie, rich and extensive.
As the expedition passed the Manitou Bluffs region, they began to see prairies, vast seas of grass that were unlike anything in their experience. The men were stunned.
June 22nd. We set out and proceeded on under a gentle breeze from the northwest, past some very swift water crowded with snags. Immediately opposite a large and extensive prairie. This prairie is beautiful. A high bottom for 1.5 miles back.
The first time that the expedition encounters prairies must have been a very interesting one for them. They grew up with the great eastern woodlands. There's the old saying, that a squirrel could go all the way from Virginia to the Mississippi River without ever touching the ground because he was jumped from tree to tree. And the eastern woodlands extended essentially end here in Missouri. The eastern woodlands start giving away to the prairie environments. And this was an environment that Americans were very unfamiliar with. Clark seemed to be fascinated by the prairies. He thought they were beautiful. He thought they were interesting.
As the party made its way upriver, the quantity of wildlife began to increase. Clark, a diligent journalist, records every deer taken. The numbers were astounding. A total of 48 deer were taken by the Corps of Discovery during the Missouri leg of their outbound journey. As they approached the site of Kansas City, it was apparent even to these seasoned hunters that they were entering a region of incredible bounty.
June 24. Captain Lewis killed a deer and Collins 3, Dreyer 2 today. Immense number of deer on both sides of the river. June 25th. The prairies come within a short distance of the river on each side, which contains, in addition to plums, raspberries, and vast quantities of wild crabapples and wildflowers, great numbers of deer are seen feeding on young willows and herbage in the banks and on the sandbars on the river. June 30. Immense numbers of deer on the banks, skipping in every direction. The party killed 9 bucks on the river and the bank today.
They were able to land at the banks and make their camps. And it was a Garden of Eden. It was so full of life, of every kind. Flora and fauna everywhere. And the numbers of animals would just be incredible to us today. Clark said in one place near Kansas City, the deer tracks are as common as a hog tracks on a farm.
They proceeded on. They passed Blue River and the mouth of the Kansas. Many of the tributaries had existing names and were known by the Frenchmen of the crew. Others were given names as the party passed. Biscuit Creek, was named after their breakfast. Tree Frog Creek, Diamond Island. On July 4th, the Corps stopped at a place they called Independence Creek, where they celebrated their young country's birth by discharging the swivel gun and issuing an extra ration of whiskey to the men. Later that evening, Clark reflected in his journal on the nature of the lands they were passing through.
July 4th. We camped in the plain. One of the most beautiful plains I've ever seen. Open and beautifully diversified, with hills and valleys all presenting themselves to the river. A handsome creek runs through. The plains of this country are covered with a leek green grass, well calculated for the sweetest and most nourishing hay, interspersed with copses of trees, spreading their lofty branches over pools, springs, or brooks of fine water.
One of my favorite passages from Lewis and Clark is Lewis riding back to his mother in Virginia after he traveled up the Missouri River. And he wrote, "This immense river waters one of the fairest portions of the globe, nor do I believe there is in the universe a similar extent of country." I mean, he's talking from both the heart, and as someone who comes from an agricultural upbringing, he saw, as all of them saw, that this was a paradise of sorts that future generations could build upon, and I think he was absolutely right.
Lewis's letter to his mother was written at Fort Mandan in modern-day North Dakota, where the party wintered, 1,609 miles from the mouth of the Missouri. Here again, they had time to reflect on the country they had passed through and to look ahead to the continuation of their great adventure.
March 31st, 1805. Dear Mother, this immense river, so far as we have yet ascended, waters one of the fairest portions of the globe. Nor do I believe that there is in the universe a similar extent of country, equally fertile, well watered, and intersected by such a number of navigable streams. Game is very abundant and seems to increase as we progress. Our prospect for starving is therefore consequently small. On the lower portion of the Missouri, from its junction with the Mississippi to the entrance of the Osage River, we met with some deer, bear, and turkeys. From thence to the Kansas River, the deer were more abundant, a great number of black bear, some turkeys, geese, swans, and ducks. The ice in the Missouri has now nearly disappeared. I shall set out on my voyage in the course of a few days. The party are now in good health and excellent spirits, are attached to the enterprise, and are anxious to proceed.
On Monday, July 16, 1804, the Corps of Discovery moved out of what was to become the state of Missouri and into legend. Ahead of them were the Great Plains, grizzly bears, those terrible mountains, and the Pacific. Their time in Missouri was formative. They learned the ways of the river, learned to work together as a crew. They began the process of diligent reporting and scientific inquiry that they would continue all the way to the Western Ocean. Most importantly, they left a record of a land relatively pristine, untouched by the settlements that were to come. In the paradise they described, we can find a testament to the richness and diversity that this land can offer.
Boy, there's something uniquely special about this river. It's almost mystical, almost spiritual. It's my hope that people will have opportunity to reconnect to this river, and in so doing, just be captured by all that this river has to offer.
The Missouri River remains timeless, dynamic, ever-changing, everlasting. This great river, our most majestic natural feature, defines this state, Missouri. And along its banks you can hear the ghost of the past, whispering in its waters. Indian canoes plied these currents. mountain men descended, their boats piled with furs. Steamboats muscled their way upstream, as did the unceasing tide of Western civilization. 200 years ago, two young men led a small group of explorers up this river. They were confident, exuberant, and utterly determined, mirroring the hopeful promise of their young nation. No more fitting monument exists to honor the spirit of Lewis and Clark than the Missouri River itself. From its banks, we can glimpse a bit of the world they discovered, a pristine continent, a natural paradise filled with immeasurable bounty. It's this river that remains the lasting legacy of Lewis and Clark.